5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Broadcasting live from the Newsmax studio in New York City. A fusion of politics, commentary, entertainment, and sports. Steve and his team bring you the latest news and opinion now. Here is Steve Malzberg.
All right, folks, welcome back. Before we get to Steve Forbes and talk some economy, there's a story breaking on FoxNews.com. Former President Bill Clinton, the day before the 9/11 attacks, is heard on a tape, which before now has not been heard and not been released. But a businessman who had access to this 13-year-old recording and handed it over to Sky News Australia, which broadcasted in a report on Monday. And he's quoted, he says in this tape, this is Bill Clinton, the day before 9/11, I'm just saying, you know, if I were Osama bin Laden, he's a very smart guy. I've spent a lot of time thinking about him. I nearly got him once. Then he says, I nearly got him, and I could have killed him. But I would have to destroy a little town called Kandahar in Afghanistan and kill 300 innocent women and children, and then I would have been no better than him, and so I didn't do it. And so I didn't do it. Now, this was pre-9/11, but Osama bin Laden and who he was and what he had been responsible for was well documented. I'm sorry. Obviously, it's hindsight, and that trigger should have been pulled. We know that trigger should have been pulled. Would it have prevented the attack scheduled for the for 9/11? I don't know. I don't know when he had him in his sights and when he could have gotten him. We'll talk more about this tomorrow and later, I'm sure. But right now, Steve Forbes joins us. Steve, how are you, sir?
Good to be with you, Steve. How are you?
It's always great to talk to you. All right, so much to get to, and of course, your new book, Money: How the Destruction of the Dollar Threatens the Global Economy and What We Can Do About It. Today, of course, the market with a bit of a hit because of, I think it's because of the default in Argentina. It is a global economy, and you know, we're so interconnected that when something goes wrong in another country, in another part of the world, still it affects us.
It does indeed, and that's one reason why we've got to get money right. Argentina hasn't done it in decades, and we see where that leads. And you can get things right on taxes, you can get it right on regulations and spending, but if you don't get the money part right, it's going to undermine your economy, and you're going to have subpar growth. It's through buying and selling with each other that we are able to get a higher standard of living. And if the money's not trustworthy, then that means we don't do as much as we could otherwise.
And I want to talk, you know, you've been pitching the gold standard for so long. I do want to get to that in a second, but let me ask you about, you brought up the growth, the GDP, 4% second quarter, coming off of the horrific number prior to that. Is that encouraging? Is that just a number that doesn't mean much?
Well, it's nice to have the snapback, but it's still a very punk recovery. And I'm not sure in the latter part of this year we're going to get much above or even close to 3% real growth. So this still ranks as the worst recovery in American history from a sharp downturn. It's like a baseball player who was hitting 150. Now he's got it up to 220 or 230. Very nice, but it ain't going to get you to the World Series.
No, and I would assume you would say the same about the jobs numbers, which, you know, even if on Friday they are you know, 200, 220, 230, still in all, that's not what we need.
And we're not getting the kind of increases in pay and productivity that would make this economy hum again. And as you point out, the labor participation rate is still at the levels of the late 70s, early 1980s, 30 years.
Which is not good at all. All right, so talk about, as you do in the book, you know, the dollar and how it does threaten the global economy, and what it would mean, and put it, and you just do such a good job of this, put it in terms that you know, the people watching at home who maybe don't have the financial background that certainly you don't, that you do, and I don't either, you know, could understand what it means to go back to the gold standard.
All it would mean is that the dollar would have a stable value, which it had for 180 years, from the time of George Washington through the early 1970s. It's similar to having a fixed number of minutes in an hour. Imagine what life would be like if the Federal Reserve, our central bank, did to clocks what it does to the dollar. You have 60 minutes an hour one day, 42 minutes the next, 74 the day after. Life would be chaotic. Imagine baking a cake. It says bake the batter 40 minutes. Now, is that nominal minutes, an inflation-adjusted minute, New York minute, a Mexican minute? So a stable dollar just makes it easier to invest, easier to do transactions with each other. But when the government constantly changes the value of the dollar, makes it suspect, then you have arbitrary winners and losers, which also undermines social trust.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to go down, Steve, if I can, to the border crisis, which, is off the front pages and off the radar for the most part because of what's going on first with Putin and now, of course, in the Middle East. And let's talk about the repercussions. The media says that the liberal media is saying, they're making villains out of these kids. By the way, most of them are 16 or 17. They're not little kids. They're being sent all over the country. 99% of them, or at least 90%, are never going to show up for a hearing. They're going to disappear. You combine that with the threat of Obama's pen, which could grant, in effect, amnesty to 5 or 6 million people. Look at it from an economic standpoint. What would that mean for the economy of the United States if these border kids stay and keep coming and Obama signs his executive order?
Well, it would put a drain on the economy. This is not a situation where you have legal immigrants who bring something in, the desire to get ahead. Most of these kids are going to be working in the underground economy, off the books economy, which is not good. And also, in a larger sense, it gives people the feeling, like the cheap dollar, that things are out of control. Even if you're 16, it's not an easy thing to hike from Guatemala to Texas or Arizona. And I think part of it is organized, and the impression is out there that come on in, the coming is good. And so the thing feeds on itself, and the fact that the president, who loves photo ops, wouldn't go down to the border on this one gives people the feeling he really just doesn't care, and that's a demoralizer.
Now let's go back to the global economy and the world. I think it was Larry Kudlow who wrote a piece. I had him on yesterday, talking about how Obama is undoing the Reagan belief that a strong U.S. economy is vital to world security, and neither one is working right now.
No, and any time the United States is weak, as happened in the 1930s during the Depression, the 1970s, a terrible malaise decade, high inflation, the world starts to unravel. A strong U.S. is critical, and when Reagan came in and made the needed reforms, and America once again was seen as an innovative, fast-growing nation, we won the Cold War. The world became a much safer place. But when people perceive weakness, and the bad actors start to misbehave, we see it with Putin most notably.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you about the president's handling or non-handling of Putin. It really struck me, and I think this sums it all up almost. When he came out to the lawn the other day with the helicopter in the backdrop, and when answering questions at the end of his little sanctions speech, said, "No, this is not another Cold War." And then he was asked, "Are we going to give weapons to the Ukrainians who have been begging, and all we're giving them is rations, MREs?" And he said, no, he said they have enough weapons, and they have more weapons than the rebels. The point is not to increase the bloodshed. And I said, I said, oh my God, that's his whole philosophy in a nutshell.
Yeah, the bad guys can, it's like gun control. The bad guys can get the guns, and the law abiders have to hope for the best.
Great analogy, yeah.
And so sending Happy Meals to Ukraine isn't going to cut it, and that's why if we sent weapons, they would be glad to do the job, but they have to have the tools to do it. We won't let them have the tools needed.
Yeah, and you see Putin stopping, or just eventually going more and more into Ukraine?
I'm not sure he's thought the thing through. He's an opportunist, and I think he's just going to push it as much as he can. And he will probably get more aggressive. His economy's not in great shape, so he's got to keep people diverted. And it's amazing the propaganda machine he's unleashed in Russia. It's like Cold War days. The U.S. is behind everything, evil, malignant country. And people don't get the alternative.
Yeah, we
And,
hijacked that
it's
plane.
bad stuff, and I worry. What I really worry about is if he starts to make a play on the western Ukraine and starts to make a play on the Baltic states like Estonia.
Steve, one final one. Are you behind Boehner's lawsuit that passed in the House with the support for which passed in the House yesterday?
Absolutely. We have to come up with remedies to a president who won't enforce the law, who arbitrarily changes the law, and the president and the executive branch need to be reminded. This is the United States, not Venezuela.
And Bill Kristol said he's not so sure, although he's against impeachment, he's not so sure it's such a bad thing for Republicans to say the word that they have to run and hide from it. Is that something that should be kept out there as a possibility to also keep a president, honest?
I think there you have to prepare public opinion, and that's where I think the lawsuit is good. It starts to get people used to the idea that this president has been lawless. We know it. We follow things closely, but most people are trying to be out there working, doing a living. And so this is part of the process. This president is acting in an unconstitutional manner. He's out of control in many areas, and this will start the education process, and if further measures are needed, they will be taken, including what I've recommended, and that is a big defunding of the IRS.
Yeah.
Start taking the money away.
That would be wonderful. You going to run for president again?
I'm an agitator now.
Steve, thank you so much. The book Money, How the Destruction of the Dollar Threatens the Global Economy and What We Can Do About It. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Steve.
My pleasure. All right, folks, Steve Forbes. When we come back, John Philip Sousa IV and who he's supporting for the presidency in 2016. Don't go away.